Negative self-talk and the ADHD entrepreneur. Are we not experts on shitting on ourselves? Why do we not like ourselves? What did we do wrong? Well, nothing really. And Dr. Judy Ho will explain why it's not us. It could be our past, or it is our past. Thank you, Judy, for coming in today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. And I love talking about this topic. So I really appreciate you bringing some attention to it.
And I've had a lot of attention with myself about that topic as well, and a lot of the listeners. And I forgot to introduce you properly. You're a clinical and forensic neuropsychologist, and you're the author of the New Rules of Attachment and Stop Self-Sabotage. So you know your stuff, and your
Oh,
YouTube channel really demonstrates, and you articulate very well this topic, and as well your TED Talk that I listened to about 5 times in
thank you.
preparation for this, and it hit me a lot. So that's what I want to talk about, is a negative self-talk here. How is negative self-talk an operating system that was developed from our past? That's what I heard from your TED Talk. Was that the correct interpretation?
Yes, definitely. So I think of negative self talk as a form of your brain's software. And it's something that develops very early in life through the experiences that you have as a child. And that's because during that time, your brain is in a rapid acquisition stage. It's
Mhm.
soaking up all the information around us, trying to make sense of how we fit into the world, how people are likely to respond to us when we reach out for help, which is so crucial in those early years when we can't fend for ourselves. And then ultimately, what we believe about ourselves and our ability to achieve good outcomes in life.
And we're not trying to shit on our parents or the past. It's just the situation or the way it was. It's the experience around. We're not here for blame. We're just understanding and being aware of the causation of it. Is that fair to
E-
say?
Exactly. This is not about blaming your parents or your caregivers. Oftentimes, they were doing the best that they could,
Hmm.
and they have their own lessons that they've learned from their own childhood, their own stressors, and they may not have had even an inkling of the negative impact some of their behaviors had on you. So it's a very small proportion of parents and caregivers who are doing harm on purpose, but nevertheless, it's the lessons that we learned because during that time, we're craving information to fill our brains and to understand the world so that we can survive and thrive in it.
Survive and thrive. I really like that phraseology. And then at the same time, well, during that time as a child, the child didn't have the cognitive ability or the presence of mind to start filtering out what was good or bad. They were just taking it all in as one.
Yeah, I think that part of it is that once certain patterns repeat themselves or certain emotional experiences that make a bigger impact on us, those things tend to go into our operating system in a heavier way than things that maybe just happened as a one off, or maybe they just didn't have as much of an emotional impact on us, right? So, I've talked to patients who remember to this day, even though they're in their 30s, that there was that one time, both parents forgot to pick them up and they were just at school until 6:30, right? It's the one time that happened, but they still remember it because it made an important emotional imprint. Or some of my patients will tell me, well, I just saw my parents arguing with each other so much that that was a repeated pattern, that it started to develop this idea in them as they grew up that, well, I don't want to rely on people too much because then my mood, whatever I do, it's going to be dependent on how they're feeling that day. And so sometimes it's from an emotional impact, one event. Other times it's from a repeated pattern. And then you try to make sense of it in your child mind, which is why a lot of the times the information is kind of incomplete in terms of what you make of it.
Okay, when you said child mind, that made a little more another connection of mine. I've been working with my therapist with the internal family system. So the
Oh,
little
really
child in
cool.
me is the one that's
Yes.
been coming out and saving me, protecting me, causing the manager and the firefighter to overreact and that. So there's a lot of correlation going on. So yeah, this is good. I like this. So how did those experiences end up becoming core beliefs that we now believe that is our true self, that we're not good or we don't do well enough?
Yeah. So core beliefs develop out of a need for our child self to protect us, just very similar to what you said. So sometimes that form of protection is adaptive. It's good for us
Hmm.
in the ways that they're trying to cope. A lot of times, though, your brain kind of goes a little overboard in that it tends to catastrophize the way that the world works, as opposed to having a more even keeled view about it.
Yeah,
And again, that all goes back to survival because there's a part of our brain that says if I can anticipate all the potential threats in your environment, then I'm going to ward off anything that could threaten your livelihood as well as your emotional health. And we know how closely those two things are linked. Without your psychological health, you can't survive physically. But I also think that it's important to remember that our ancestors, the ones who gave us the genetic blueprint of our brains now, are not the people who were doing mindfulness activities
right.
when there were tooth bears around and about to kill them, right? It's like that's not the time to do mindfulness. The ones that survived are the ones who were the nervous Nellies. And so that's
Right.
our genetic blueprint, as opposed to the ones who thought, hey, maybe it's a good idea to do mindfulness right now in the middle of the woods and I could just be eaten by a bear at any time.
Yeah, and the core beliefs, that's a tough one to overwrite. Like you use the term the operating system, and when forget where I was, I think we were in an entrepreneurial group, and basically saying your body absorbs all this negative energy,
Yeah.
and then subconsciously writes that information or on a record or on a hard drive, then it keeps playing on repeat, regurgitating that information. The energy I absorbed was you're not good, you're not good. Now my brain takes that information and just keeps repeating that to me. Is that along the same lines of what we're talking about here?
Yeah, it's very, very similar. So essentially, your brain starts to repeat the same ideas over and over again. And our brain has this very powerful way of confirming existing beliefs. So once you
Right.
have this belief percolating, even if it's in the background, even if you don't ever really recognize that it's happening, your brain is constantly processing information and it's looking for information from your environment that proves your existing beliefs as opposed to negates it. And that's just because confirmation bias is so much easier for our brains when we're talking about high lift activities for our brains where it's more exhausting, we have to put our whole energy to it. That's harder for our brain to do. So it's easier for our brain just to kind of absorb whatever information seems to be in line with what we already believe. And then, of course, then it becomes a real negative cycle as every time it's going to strengthen that belief even more. So there's a little bit of a selective processing that's happening that causes this negative self talk to be wedged in so deeply in our subconscious.
So it's along the same lines as CBT, where one behavior will support an emotion, and I forget the third one, but becomes a revolving circle. And then that's what we'll
Yes,
call it cognitive distortion, right? If you're looking for a
exactly.
problem, your brain will say that is a problem.
Exactly. And then, of course, a cognitive distortion could be for some people, things that are a little bit more surface level, like the way that they might interpret one situation to the next.
Mhm.
Core beliefs is sort of encompassing everything. So it's a lot more generalized. It's not just about this situation, it's about your whole life, or it's about your whole self, or everybody who's ever going to interact with you. But nevertheless, there's that very strong connection between your surface level thoughts and negative distortions or cognitive distortions and your core beliefs. There's definitely a connection. You can see how one formed from the other.
Well, like the third person who's mentioned this in the last month or so about how your brain actually looks for things to support core beliefs.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes.
and does that have something to do because that's where your brain is comfortable? Like I
Yeah.
know how to survive in this environment, so I'm okay here. If I like the
Exactly.
one thing I just realized, if I want to go in a more positive environment where I was compared to 20 years ago, it scares the hell out of me because I don't know how to behave or react in there. But
Yes.
I know if I'm on guard all the time here, I'm comfortable. Sounds
Yeah.
counterintuitive, but I'm being told that this is correct.
Yeah, it is. And that's why there's that old saying, the devil you know is better, right? Than
Yeah.
the person or devil that you don't. And the idea is that sometimes it's easier to manage in a way which you probably know both intellectually and emotionally that it's not the best way to do it, but you also know that, hey, this worked because I'm still here, right? I'm
Hmm.
still here. I'm still an intact person. And it's much scarier to go into an unknown world, even if that unknown world of thinking could actually be better for you in the long run. So it takes time to do it. Doesn't mean that we can't. It just means that that's not necessarily where our brain goes first.
Hmm. So how did we get to this point of being very good at negative talk and developing these core beliefs that, for me, deep down, I know I don't believe these core beliefs, but they're there and they kind of control at the same time.
Yeah, negative core beliefs, I think most of the times people recognize intellectually that probably isn't how life really is, right?
Right.
But I think an easier way to understand it and how I've explained it to some of my patients is that it's a fear that you have that this could be true, right? So
Mhm.
if you have a core belief that, you're not successful or, I'm never going to amount to anything, you don't intellectually actually believe those things, but maybe there's a deep-seated fear that that is a truth about you that someone might uncover. So I think that that's a different way to understand why core beliefs form. Again, that links to the protection aspect, right? It's like a fear that you're trying to avoid, but through doing avoidance strategies, you end up not living your life in the way that would actually help you to do the things that you really want. So I think that the best way to think about altering core beliefs is not just to all of a sudden switch to positive self-talk, because that's not necessarily feasible for everybody. And it also doesn't feel realistic. It's more about having balanced self-talk. It's about understanding that you're going to have challenging times, but believing in your own resilience.
Okay. A fear that it can be true. The core belief gets created around that to protect us.
Mhm.
Whoa. I use like I'm just looking back at some of my core beliefs, and it's tied to some sort of fear, which is, yeah, being called out or not being able to. Maybe the perfectionism gets in the way, but that's a big one for me.
Yeah.
Um, and then the balanced self-talk, that can only effectively work if you're aware of these core beliefs and you're making it. I know that this isn't correct, and we're talking about it. If you're aware of it, then catching yourself, you're crapping on yourself. You
Right.
say, no, no,
Right.
no, 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 not today. You
Right.
can, that's where you would, balance it out, say, no, I'm not, I don't suck. I can do this. Not put lipstick on a pig here, like I think as you were referring to, a fake positive talk.
Right.
But more of a real, I don't know, I'm finding I'm having more of a conversation with myself with these urges of don't do, or you're not going to do well. And it's just like,
Mhm.
I guess that's fact checking in the CBT world in a way.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. And I think that the fact checking, I think some people have a really hard time with this concept of fact checking because they're like, well, but it feels true to me. And it's
Mhm.
something that we do have to understand is just the way language works, and to not discount the feeling that you have, because a lot of people will say this. They will say, when I have a thought, it just feels real, and then I'm acting as if it's real. But that is the way that language works. It's just the
Mhm.
way that it's language has been constructed. But if you can just make a little switch in your mind that you literally have thousands to tens of thousands thoughts a day, and there's no way that all of them could be true, right?
Yeah.
A thought is just a mental event. Just because you had a thought doesn't mean that it's going to be true or that it is true now. And I think that if we can do that and understand our relationship with our thoughts better, that would be an important step.
Mm. Impressive. Like that, that's awesome. Attachments. The one thing you talked about in your TED talk that has to do with your operating system is there's four different types of attachments. I don't want to bastardize this, and I'll let you take it from here about the attachments, because I'll tell you the three of them, the three insecure ones definitely hit me on all levels.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people will realize that they're probably a combination of insecure attachment styles, or even like an insecure attachment style and a secure attachment style, depending on the realm of life that they're talking about. And I think that that's far more common than just being able to neatly put all of us into these four boxes. Like, I'm
Mhm.
secure all the time, or like I'm avoidant all the time. But the insecure attached self talk, really, again, when you go back to this idea of fear and trying to protect, it makes sense because it's really about protecting and warding off certain ideas that you've developed because of your past experiences. It's like you don't want to experience that again. You don't want to feel that pain again. You don't want to be so vulnerable again. And that's why you have the self-talk that's associated with each of the types.
To protect you
Yes.
from the negative experience you're avoiding.
Yes, exactly.
So what is the how does the attachment experiences work with negative self-talk? Just want to connect those two dots for
Yeah,
people.
absolutely. So when somebody has insecure attachment, they've experienced a number of different types of events and patterns that cause them to, one, believe a negative narrative about themselves, two, believe a negative narrative about other people, and or believe a negative narrative about just the way the world works in general and what's going to happen to them. And I think that those are the key things that lead the insecure attached individuals to start developing certain patterns in negative self talk. Because when you think about the framework of how you think about yourself in the world, that was disrupted at some point with certain experiences. And because you're trying to make sense of those experiences with your child mind, you have less flexibility. You're not thinking, well, okay, my mom just wasn't perfect. She had her own depression issues. Or, okay, my parents had a terrible marriage, but that's different from them loving me. As a child, you can't make those subtle, nuanced conclusions, right? As a
Yeah.
child, it's very concrete. It's like, I guess I'm not loved, or like, I guess my mom doesn't care about me, right? You're not thinking about, oh, wow, like her life was probably pretty hard as well. We're not thinking things like that. And so that's how those insecure attached experiences, for example, feeling neglected by parents, or only being validated by parents when you achieve, or having to live in the chaos and like basically not even having a parent at all. Those are just some examples of how insecure attachment can look like for people, and that goes into the development of these core beliefs that stay with them even into their adulthood.
Yeah, and you said you kept using the word feeling and emotion. So it sounds like as a child, do children just it's more they relate to the world based on how they feel and emotions?
Yeah,
And
I
that way
think
they're taking those as facts?
Yeah, I think that part of it is that there is a emotional connection that they can't totally describe. So they have the emotion, but as a child, you don't generally have the vocabulary or the understanding of what
Hmm.
that emotion even is, or what it means about you, or how to cope with it, right? So it can feel kind of out of control, and I think it's especially feeling out of control for many children because you can't really describe it. And that, I think, is part of why you start to develop these concrete ideas of like rules for life, essentially, because they feel like it's something you can grasp, and it also feels like something you can control.
Hmm. Yeah, I can relate. Yeah, I got a lot of personal rules that protected me from relationships or potentially opening me up to a situation that may never
Mhm.
happen, but I'll cut a relationship now just in case.
Mhm.
Um,
Exactly.
for secure attachments, are you saying that can we have secure attachment and insecure attachments at the same time, depending on the situation or as we grow?
Yeah, definitely. So first of all, you can heal insecure attachment at any age. So at any age and stage of your life, you can heal any insecure attachment that's getting in your way. But I know a lot of people who have a combination of secure and insecure attachments depending on the domain of life. So for example, they might behave like a securely attached person at work, but in their romantic relationships, they behave like one of the insecure types.
Hmm.
Sometimes also there's certain triggers that come up, right? So for example, they felt abandoned by their parents for whatever reason when they were younger. And so anytime they get into a situation where they feel like they're going to get abandoned again, whether it's by friends, their boss, or a romantic partner, that's when the insecure attachment resurfaces. But for the most part, they're kind of behaving like a securely attached person when they're not under stress.
Uh, so, well, you're throwing a lot at me here. It's processing a lot of information. This is good. How can we work on our negative self-talk that's related to our insecure attachments, which is
So,
tied to our core beliefs, correct? Are you, sorry,
yes.
maybe before we go to that, are core beliefs and insecure attachment two separate things or two things or the same thing?
Yeah.
Sorry.
So they can be related to one another. So
Okay.
your insecure attachment is likely foundational to developing self-talk and core beliefs that are not serving you. And
Hmm.
somebody who has secure attachment doesn't mean that they're completely impenetrable to developing negative self-talk, but that their risk is much lower than somebody who's developed insecure attachment.
Okay. So how can we work on our negative self-talk and use the term heal insecure attachments?
Well, the big thing is a concept called reparenting. So, this is the conscious act of providing yourself with a consistent care and understanding that you may have missed in whatever way as a child. And it's all about becoming the nurturing inner parent you needed, but maybe you didn't have. It's this idea of your adult self being able to connect with and meet the needs of your inner child. And that metaphorical little you is alive in all of us. They have
Mhm.
memories, they have aspirations, they have certain experiences that they are afraid of. And the adult self, because you are more knowledgeable, you are more capable, you have more agency now than you did when you were a child, when these negative self talks and also when these core beliefs developed, you're able to now heal that insecure attachment and help it to develop more balanced self talk.
And since our brain is very habitual,
Hmm.
remembers a lot of stuff, I'm assuming we can't just reparent once or twice and then we're all good to go. Our triggers will come back no matter what, I'm
Yeah.
assuming.
Exactly. And I think sometimes I'll work with patients who get really down on themselves because they're like, well, I thought that I was healed or I was making great progress. And then I got triggered yesterday and I just behaved in exactly the same way that I did, a few years ago when I was in the same situation. And I think it's important, as you just pointed out, that we might get triggered again. But this time you understand how that happened and you also understand how to cope and how to reparent yourself and bring yourself back to a securely attached state. So there's a lot more agency. It's not that it'll never happen again, but that you have the tools to be able to continue your healing and to change. And as you just said, it has to be consistent. Part of how insecure attachment developed is because there was inconsistencies in your childhood experiences that your brain couldn't make sense of.
Mhm.
So it locked into a very concrete way of thinking about it to try to protect yourself. So the idea is to keep reparenting yourself essentially every single day in small ways. It's small, it's intentional, it's consistent, and that's how you can hold on to secure attachment and balanced thinking.
Yeah, and it sounds like if you as long as you're in the right environment, which I've been preaching a lot about environment control.
Yes.
If you're around the negativity, it's hard to stay away from those attachment styles. But if you're around people who are supportive and very well for your well-being, it's easier to reparent yourself. Or if you're going to go, like for me, I know if I'm going to go in those environments, I know I'm not going to do well. I can prepare myself
Yes,
and
exactly.
and have
And
a
being
conscious barrier put up.
exactly, exactly. Yeah, so interesting. We definitely have some synergy in what we've been thinking and talking about because recently I've been speaking to people about, how important it is to protect your inner circle, and the people that you let into your life both emotionally and energetically. And um just because somebody doesn't belong in your inner circle doesn't necessarily mean that you have to cut them off completely. Sometimes
Mhm.
it's not feasible if it's a family member or somebody you work with or you guys share a group of friends, but if you can set an internal boundary for yourself, hey, like this person is not in my inner circle. And therefore, I'm putting a protective barrier in terms of the kind of interactions I want to have with them. And also, when they behave in ways that are going to trigger me, I'm prepared, right? I also know that I can visualize that they're not somebody's opinions who I should be paying so much mind to. And that helps a lot just to know to not engage in that way. But you can make small talk with them. You can be cordial at a family dinner party. That's really a big piece of it. Like you said, reparenting so much easier when you can attentive and conscious of the people you surround yourself with.
Well, thank you very much. You just validated something I've been working on a lot. I do, and if I'm going to these type of situations, I actually play out scenarios before I go there, what things they may say, what if they're gonna say this, how can I react? How am I going, early
Yeah,
warning systems that I can pent up. But I did
yeah,
like, they're gonna say this, this, and this. What am I deciding now to react? Let it go, politely
right.
say, get up and go. So
Yeah,
I come up with some escape plan. So when it shows up, it's like I've already thought it through. I don't have to process it as much. So that's really cool.
exactly. Yeah.
Can you give me a couple examples of reparenting talk? From your
Yeah.
TED talk, you said, I'm gonna cut, your different phrases about your three different attachment styles, your anxious, avoidant, and disorganized attachments, but you've got four in there that just, yeah, that's me. I
Mhm.
deserve to suffer.
Mhm. Yeah.
Everything I gain needs to come with pain.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, that can come from a variety of different places, but when you think about this form of negative self-talk that I deserve to suffer, there's something that's attached to experiences that you've had that make it feel like, well, this is not supposed to happen to me. Good things shouldn't happen. They need to come at a price.
Right.
And that's really hard because that whole idea of, inner self-worthiness, most people don't have it. Most people don't achieve it, but there are some people who feel a little bit more like they don't deserve good things. And it could come from a lot of different experiences. Or if they have a good thing, then it has to come with pain, that
Hmm.
has to come with suffering somehow. It's hard to understand this idea in this world that you can like exist in, where, oh, okay, well, this good thing happened to me. It's probably combination of hard work, maybe a little bit of luck, God, whatever you believe in. It's harder for them to really understand that there could be all these other things that make them worthy of something good. But that
Yeah.
obviously can make you really tripped up, because when good things happen to you, you're like already anticipating something bad should be happening soon,
Oh,
or
yeah.
like thinking that you shouldn't deserve what you do.
So
That's
how
so
can I
hard to
reparent that? So how can I
yeah.
reparent that I don't deserve pain?
Yeah. So, I think it's really important for me. I really love just visualization exercises where you try to remember yourself as a child, as an innocent child. If you have a hard time with visualizations, find an old picture of yourself. And then just imagine, this inner child saying like, I'm scared that I'm not worthy of good things. And most of the times people can connect a lot more when they visualize themselves as a child, like a child who's clearly innocent and is just trying to
Mm.
survive in the world. It's like, how could you say that that innocent child doesn't deserve good things? And that's really you. That's still you right now, right? All our inner children, the way that we think, it still all derives from that part of ourselves. And so I think that sometimes visualizing yourself as the adult self, giving your inner child even a verbal validation, or if you're not, such a language based person, just giving them a hug, a pat on the back. If you can just visualize these little things, it can start to shift things over time, because you have to remember all of us have inherent worth. And especially when you go back to where we all started, it's like all of us were born into the world completely innocent. We just didn't know what was going
Yeah.
on. We were not bad people, right? Maybe the 0.01% of people who are truly evil, but that's a very few number of people. And if
Hmm.
that's actually you, you would not be wrestling with this question. So, like, that's not you. Yeah. Yeah. If
True
you're even
enough.
thinking about it, that's not you.
But what I'm hearing is reparenting is not that difficult. It's not a
Yeah.
big drawn out process. It's just simply saying,
No.
dude, you're okay, or you're fine. You
Yeah.
deserve it.
Yeah, I feel like it's become this elusive thing where people think that it's like this weird, like pie in the sky idea. But, to me, I think inner parenting, inner child parenting just involves things like consciously engaging in self care and telling yourself that you deserve it. Like every
Yeah.
time you make a difficult decision, but you know that that was aligned with your top values, that's a form of reparenting. When bad things happen, affirming to yourself that you are deserving of love and care in the world, that's a form of reparenting. Every time, as we were just talking about, you set boundaries and seek out healthy relationships, that's a form of reparenting. Every time you acknowledge your accomplishments and celebrate your progress, no matter how small it is, and know that that's still worth celebrating,
Yeah.
that's a form of reparenting. Like all these things that you probably do from time to time, but you just haven't been consistent with it and you haven't been intentional with it. That's really what reparenting looks like.
The consistency part I just heard you say is the big differentiator.
Yes. Yes.
Consistency. Wow.
Yes. Yep.
Wow.
That's how you reprogram your brain, is with the consistency.
Wow. That's weird. That's cool. Well, thank you very much. Like there's, like you said before, emotions are not facts and thoughts are not facts.
Mhm.
And we got to change that or check them to make sure that they're not supporting our core beliefs. Like you said, that your brain's always looking for things to support your core belief. And your core beliefs were created to protect you based on a subconscious fear that it can be true,
Right.
right?
Exactly.
And then reparenting is a conscious act, a consistent conscious act to be your own nurturing parent and to rebuild your secure attachment with yourself. Is that a fair statement to make?
Yes, that's definitely a fair statement.
Wow, this is fantastic. Where can people find you?
Well, you guys can find me on my website, drjudyho.com. If you subscribe to my newsletter, I provide lots of free resources there. I also have a 10-minute podcast. Speaking of attention spans, it's called Mental Health Bites with Dr. Judy, which is I just started. And essentially, it's
Mhm.
like getting like a quick dip in and getting some information that might be helpful for your life. That is happening weekly. And then you can also follow me on social media. I'm at Dr. Judy Ho.
Nice. And you've got a really great YouTube channel, so please go there and
Thank you.
definitely listen to her, listen or view your TED Talk. And I'll put that in the show notes as well so people can find that. So thank you for joining us today. I appreciate your time.
Oh, thank you. I had such a great conversation with you. And thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with everybody. I really love your podcast and what you're doing.
I appreciate it. And for you, the listener, you can overwrite your default operating system by healing your insecure attachment wounds by reparenting yourself. And the question I have for you, actually, it's this statement today. You deserve to be happy. You deserve to succeed in life with no pain. We're all been there. We're all working through it. You're not the only one. And just be nice to yourself. And I'm also
Yeah.
speaking to myself right now. So it's not
Right.
just,
Right. It's so true. We have to remind ourselves to just be kind. And most of the times we are kinder to other people. So it's like when you have your next negative self talk, just ask yourself, would I say this to the person that I love the most or the person I care about? And usually the answer is no.
yeah.
So,
And like I
yeah,
say, no one can say anything worse than what I tell myself. And that's got to stop.
so true. So true. We all
So
do it. Yes.
thanks again, Dr. Judy. And to you, the listeners, thanks again for learning with me. Talk to you soon.